I grew up in the Western Cape of South Africa, and I grew up on that beautiful, beautiful farm. It's my heart's place, so I go there still often. So I guess I always got intrigued into agriculture because of the harsh conditions that we had to deal with on those farms. So this waterfall at the back was just at the back of our house, but that's a misunderstanding of the conditions really of what were happening there. So it's in a semi-arid area, so that waterfall only flows like 4 years, every once in 4 years. So yeah, it was almost nice to take a picture when there was water flowing. So the average rainfall is about 400 millimeters of rain per year in that area. So they had a pipeline from the other side of the mountain built years ago to produce water to that side of the mountain where we grew up. So we were basically the second last farm that received water from the river system. So on top of the water scarcity, you have lots of stones in the soil, really lots and lots of stones. And if it's not stony, then you have clay, you have water-logged conditions, and on top of all that, you have salts like nowhere seen before. So that's all the challenges that I had to, or seen as a child, but still the production was very successful. So I think that's why I went and learned horticulture. So I went to Stellenbosch, which is also another beautiful town, and I've been just thinking to myself, I've been living there now, I won't give my age away, but that is also 22 years later and I'm still living in Stellenbosch. So I studied soil science and horticulture, and I did my master's degree in horticulture. Specifically, it was a complex trial, nutrition, irrigation, and the focus on calcium and bitterpit. So from there I worked at a private consultancy firm. I had the privilege of working for him for 9 years, and I guess that's where I had get practical experience and everything. So I'm going to tell you just about the basics of nutrition and what we do every day in South Africa. So if I just go to a farm the first time and I look at the orchard, nutrition can be very complex, figuring everything out. But as soon as you learn every condition that's involved in that orchard, then it can become much more simple. And as the years go by and you go back to the same orchard every time, then you can know the conditions of that orchard. So I always tell the farmers, just like any farmer in the world, you always sneak peek what is your neighbor doing, and and then telling the fertilizer guy, but he's doing that, is that working? So every orchard is unique because the conditions in that orchard is unique. So you have to treat your orchard at its own. So basically my talk will just be about the role of each element in nutrition. Then I will tell you a little bit what we do in terms of leaf and soil analysis, and then I'll go through what we then put together to compile a nutrition program. So just at the beginning of everything, it's important to understand that your plant is basically made up of, I just have to get my English always for the elements, carbon, oxygen and hydrogen, and they form 95% of your tree. So luckily for us, we have nature playing a role for us there. So your carbon and oxygen are being taken up by the leaves in the form of carbon dioxide. And then your hydrogen, of course, we give as irrigation, and they all form together to produce the carbohydrates, which is basically the energy of the plant. There might be more, but I've got 14 there, but I'll just concentrate on the first 6 maybe in my presentation. So that is basically the process that I have just described. So the sunlight is free for us. rain conditions can be a little bit different, but sunlight we get, the carbon dioxide we get from the leaves. So what we can put on the soil or the plant for extra motivation for the photosynthesis process to take place is we can control the water and the minerals. And if we do it correctly, then we get oxygen free from the plant. So basically we can group those elements in two main groups. We got your macro elements that is needed by the plants in high quantities. And then you've got your micro elements that are, I call it a more specific element. They are needed in small quantities, but also at specific times in the plant's development. So some of the things that we seem to forget sometimes, it doesn't matter. No element is more important than the other one. So if one of those macro or micro elements are deficient in the plant, they would have a negative effect on the processes happening in the plant. So deficiency symptoms is easy to see if it's on the leaves, and they will remain on the leaves until you spray something that corrects that symptom. But not all nutrients are so easy just to see a magnesium deficiency. Some nutrients are limitations is maybe within the cell or within the chloroplast or wherever it plays a role, and then it's not so easy to see, but you have tools like, I will tell you later, like leaf analysis to monitor that. So it's also important that the other side is also true. If you have too much of one element in the plant, it can also show a symptom, and then it goes more to the toxicity side. So with the visual symptoms of the plant, going into your orchard regularly and having leaf and soil analysis available, we can have a fairly good idea what the nutritional status of the tree is. So if we want to apply nutrition, it seems of course basic. There's two methods to do it. We apply it either through the soil, and that is mostly the elements that are required in high quantities. Like for instance, if your plant needs 60 kilograms of nitrogen, it's not possible to put it on the leaf, so you have to put it on the soil. So foliar nutrition, we do give the microelements also through foliar nutrition, but that is at certain times of physiological development. And mostly we apply the microelements. It can be due to different conditions, like if you have very high pH soils, then the microelements isn't being taken up by the soil as effectively, and then also just for specific timing of different physiological stages. If you want the boron in at flower, then it's quick and easy to put it on the leaves. The advantage of foliar nutrition, if you have, for instance, a nitrogen deficiency and you have already put on some soil nutrition, if you apply extra foliar nutrition, the symptoms should disappear within 7 to 10 days, or you should see a difference. So we rely a lot on our soil analysis, because you've got really the desserts of soil here, as I've seen so far. We've got the bad end of everything, especially in the Western Cape, with all the mountains, with drainage, with mountain and earth developments that are taking place. You've got sand on top of clay and in sand, so you've got so many layers going on. So this is some of the things that I deal with every day. So you've got stones and stones and stones. You've got soils with 90% stones. You can hardly even see the soil in between. But the trees grow if you do it correctly. Then we've got a lot of calcareous areas where different production is. And we've got lots of sandy soils. So it's important for us to know the pH of the soil. that in our fruit production area, it can easily differ from 3.5 to even 8. And we basically use the potassium chloride method for our pH. We rely also a lot on resistance because that tells you the salinity of the soil that we're dealing with, and all the others so that we can make our nutrition calculations. And then we have the leaf analysis that are normally taken at the end of January. We try to do the leaf, or farmers do the leaf analysis every year. The soil, if the trees are planted, they do it every 3 years. But if you have very leachy soils, we try and do it at least every 2 years just to get the status of what's going on in the fruit. So this is basically, oh sorry, there's some Afrikaans still in, but this is basically what we use. I try to convert it, but this is our norms for different fruits. Over the years, we've developed some different norms, like if we know, for instance, a pink lady or a rogala, we've seen that some phosphate levels shouldn't be below 0.16 in our case. So this is the standard, but for some cultivars we use a little bit different norms. So if you have all the information of the soil, the leaf, the visual symptoms of your tree, then we are halfway through to compiling a nice integrated fertilizer program. So the other things that we of course take in mind is 3H cultivar rootstock, the fruit quality of the seasons, we like to keep track of that. Then of course looking at the tree growth and the leaf color, and knowing each cultivar's physiological stages, then you know when to apply nutrition. So with all that information, and then something that's not there, but we also look at the slope. Is your orchard facing south? Is it facing north? That's also playing a role. So with all that information, we can compile a really good nutrition program. So this is just an example that I'm showing you what I can do with leaf and soil analysis, especially in our case. So potassium is commonly low in our leaf samples, and then there's a whole list that we can go through to check what is the problem. So firstly, of course, the soil, we just check is it low in the soil, and then if it's not low, then we check the balance between the elements in the soil, and also in the leaves we check the balance of the elements. And if that is not a problem, we look visually at the trees to see if we can see some signs. It normally comes out that something like fruit growth is you have small fruit, or just curly leaves, or just poor growths. So if the problem is not nutritional, then for something like potassium, it can be sometimes the climatic conditions or something in the roots. So then we physically go and look at the roots, we look at the irrigation schedule to just see what is causing the low potassium in the leaves. So this is an example of some study that I did, that the potassium levels just drop every 3 years. So I started with this farm when those trees were already planted. So after 3 years, I told them, no, something is wrong here. We have to go and look in the soil. And then we did some holes, and that is what we found, that the problem was actually already with soil preparation. The soil wasn't prepared deep enough, and the physical tree planting, most of the trees were planted on a stone, and the stones were not moved away. So I can literally put my hand down under there as the roots just grow horizontal. So what's happened, what's causing the low potassium, is that the irrigation schedule is just every 4 days in very sandy soil. So with these roots growing horizontal, it's just drying out on top. So this is another example about how we use the leaf and soil. So this is also this is a citrus orchard. So you've got this yellow trees in spots all over the orchard. So I've been asking for the guys for soil samples now for 3 years. I also just started working with them. And in South Africa it works like that I'm not going to take the soil samples, because then the money comes out of my pocket. So I want the farmers to learn the right things to do. So eventually, Tuesday night, the soil analysis came through, and I could just immediately see citrus needs a pH of about 6. So there's the problem. If you look at that pH, 3.9, 4. So we have to lift the soil with lime. So I'm just going through the elements now, and now I'll focus specifically on fruit quality. So of course nitrogen is important for your normal fruit growth, fruit production and fruit quality, but those three should be in balance. So this is typically what we do for young trees. Of course it can be different in every scenario. Some of our trees get only 60 kilograms of nitrogen, and some I've never given 200 kilograms personally. That's a bit high for me, but that's the norms of South Africa. So depending on your rootstock and in what soil you are growing your trees, that is a basic standard young tree seasonal nutrition. So as your tree starts going to their second year, then the nitrogen levels are still high, and depending on the leaf analysis, you can give a little bit potassium and phosphorus for the soil. And as the trees start bearing, especially in South Africa with our poor soils, we see that you must make a large jump in potassium fertilizer, because as soon as the tree starts bearing fruit, it takes up a lot of potassium. So if you don't keep up with the potassium, then the next year's fruit can be very small. And then that's basically your spring fertilizer. So we do not a post-harvest fertilizer, but it's actually more in summertime. So if we get the leaf results in January, it takes about 3 weeks, then we have the results. Then we compile a foliar nutrition program and a fertilizer program to give back to the tree what's been taken out by the fruit. But that's very block specific, so it depends on all your years. We go back, we look at 5 years. So if we're seeing the tree has a vigorous, it's a vigorous orchard, then I won't give that amount, then I will give back a little bit less. So it's really precision of each orchard, what we give back at that time of the year. So that would normally be for apples. The fruit is still on the trees, then we will do this corrective nutrition, and it's about March that we give this. So for nitrogen, to keep everything in balance, it's important to know that if you have poor growth, you don't have enough shoots and you don't have enough buds, so of course your fruit production would not be so high. And the other side is also true. If you have too vigorous trees, then you have shade, you don't have enough lights to form buds, and then you also have poor production. So most fruit quality problems is from too much nitrogen. Of course, if you don't have enough nitrogen, you don't have enough fruit production. So what happens when you have too much nitrogen in your tree, the excess nitrogen will go into the fruit and they can accumulate there, and your fruit are too large. You have green fruit. If you think about color development, they are soft and they are more prone to pre-harvest drop, and also more likely to be affected by bitter bit. So for us, we do a really precision nitrogen nutrition, and we look at the time that each tree needs the nitrogen. So we know that if you give too much nitrogen early in the season, it competes with the calcium influx to the fruit. So the total, it's good to keep track of your nutritional status each year so that you can vary your total according to what's going on in the soil and the leaf and the crop production. So we often rely on calcium nitrate in the early season, especially in the very sandy soils. It's a nice product to give a little bit of nitrogen but also give calcium, and it's often easier to cut on your nitrogen than to supply more calcium if the conditions for calcium uptake is poor. Phosphorus, which is our second macro element, we don't have that much problems in South Africa. We don't apply a lot of phosphorus nutrition because our soils we try to keep in the range. I'll just show you the next slide. So most of our phosphorus we try and give at soil preparation. We do 4 profile pits per hectare. I do the classification. We get the soil analysis from that. I group different soils together and we get the soil analysis from that, and then we try and give the phosphorus what is needed before plant. So it's important for us to remember that if you have low pH soil, then it can be the phosphorus can be either bind with iron or with aluminium, and if you have the other side too high pH, then your phosphorus binds with calcium. So we try and keep the pH right, and then the phosphate mobility would be better. If we look at potassium, then the first thing that comes in mind is fruit growth. Basically, potassium fruit growth goes hand in hand, but the timing of the potassium fertilizer should be good. And at the first stage of fruit development, when you have your cell division stage, then of course you want the calcium to be taken up. So if we have very sandy soils and our calcium is very low in the soil, our potassium is very low in the soil, then we'll give just a little bit, 20 to 30% of our total potassium during the cell division phase, so that it not competes too much with calcium. But if we don't give it, we've seen that you end up with small fruit. So especially in the very sandy soils. In the clay soil, it's a different scenario. So we want to give most of our potassium when the fruit is at its fastest growth. So that is basically from this time onwards in apples and earlier for stone fruit after the pip hardening. So potassium plays, of course, the role of regulating the water status of all cells. So that is in your fruit, in your plant, in your roots, all cells. So if potassium is low, then your plant would go sort of into shutdown. The stomata would close, and if the stomata close, you don't have the calcium coming into the plant as it goes through the stream of transpiration. So like you have now very wet soils, then it's a negative thing for potassium uptake. So as you can see here, this is a graph that's been, I don't even know who's the author of this graph, but it's been going through the loop of South Africa, so we all use it. So if the soil is saturated with water, like in early season now, then you actually don't have any uptake of potassium or calcium because it's just too wet. The soil needs oxygen for the transpiration stream to go. And of course your water and temperature goes hand in hand. So you need an ideal temperature of 18 to 24 degrees for your potassium to be at its best uptake. But what is interesting and what is very nice for you is if your soils just dry out now a little bit, then you will still have calcium uptake, because calcium uptake can take place at colder soil temperatures. So if you look at calcium, this is the nice one for me, as I worked with that also, and I've done some of that photos. It was very nice working with the bitter pit project. So calcium is mainly in the cell walls, that's where you need it. So where we need the calcium to be is in the middle part of the cell, which we call the middle lamella. So we want it there to form the protein, pectin proteins that helps with the firmness of the cells. So firmness is of course a good parameter of fruit quality, so that's the role that calcium plays. So the tree doesn't always absorb calcium enough for its own, so we can help the tree, but we also have to understand the conditions that has an influence on calcium uptake. So there's just some nice pictures that calcium, that you don't have to just worry about apples. Calcium is every fruit, it plays a big role. So I'm just going to give you some background about how we do it in South Africa. So we depend a lot on our soil. So firstly, we try and correct the soil. So if the pH is not right, especially if the pH is low, if the pH is high, there's not much we can do about it. But if the pH is low, then we give the plant lime or gypsum. If the calcium is also low, that's our first stage of correcting the soil. And then, of course, we need root growth to be at its optimum for calcium uptake. We need optimal soil moisture, as I showed you before. And we need the nutrients to be in a balance for calcium to be taken up at its best. So with all that correct, it's still not a given that our calcium will get to the fruit. So calcium shows low mobility in the phloem. So that is on the outer part of your trunk, and it goes up through the xylem, which is the inner part of the trunk, to the fruit. And even the distribution in the fruit, the places where you need it is not in the center of the fruit, it's also not in the peel, it's somewhere just below the peel of the, so it's a difficult position that we need the calcium to be in. So what we normally do in South Africa is we give, try and do every conditions right, and then we also spray 8 to 12 calcium sprays foliar, 8 for our lesser susceptible cultivars and 12 for our more susceptible cultivars like our Brayburn and our Golden. And the common products that we use is calcium chloride and calcium nitrate. It is still at the moment the cheapest because price is everything now in our country, and the availability of products is also a problem. And then like pears, like Pharrell, we also spray 2 calcium sprays. So magnesium, we know that magnesium also plays, the magnesium and calcium ratio should be in a norm for calcium uptake to be good. So we try and know our magnesium status always. So that's the same as for calcium. If the pH is low, we put on dolomitic lime if the magnesium is also low in the soil. If the magnesium is only low but the pH is right, we use a product called AgMag, which is a magnesium oxide that we give to the soils. It's a very expensive one, but the result is good. And if you have low magnesium, then your plant is just too yellow, so you have to give the magnesium. And then we also look at the leaves, and if it is low in the leaves, we apply extra magnesium, normally in November, to our leaves. Zinc is also a very important element just to have the plant growing and green. So zinc plays a role in zinc's role in bud break is very important. It kicks on an enzyme called the tryptophan, and the tryptophan gets the auxins moving, and if the auxins moving, then you have the bud break of the plant. So we apply zinc in the winter, even if the leaves are low. Winter closer to bud break, but in the winter, again at green tip, flowering, after flowering, and then we continue with zinc through the summer, just because our soils doesn't really give us zinc. We have a lot of zinc products in South Africa, so it's a competition between all the chemical guys, so you must keep on track with what's in the products. So for me, it's just the active zinc that I want to put on at the end of the season. I calculate and then go back and tell the guys which one I would use. So normally comes out that they don't listen to me till the end of the season. So boron is another important one, also in terms of calcium, because it has been shown in studies that if you have enough boron in your flowering stage, then it helps keep the calcium mobile and the uptake is better. So we apply our boron not so much at flower time, because we try and keep it correct the whole summer and through the whole year, so that it is there when the plant flowers. So we put boron on at 30% flower for apples. For stone fruit, it's a little bit different. We put on 2 for flower, and then we do it again 2 weeks after petal drop, and continue throughout the summer to have enough boron in the plant.
Do you do it foliar or through fertigation?
Foliar. Yeah. And yeah, that's basically my last one. So yeah, we have in all farms, we have climatic conditions against us, so that we can do nothing about. But the factors we can do something about is we can try and get crops low fruit size, vigorous shoot in control by all the management practice that we all use so far: thinning, pruning, nutrition, and irrigation. And if we can do all those management practices correctly, we should have no problem. We've done it very well in South Africa. The one region has been for the past 10 years not over 2%, but a bit in the whole region, so we keep it low. So yes, but that's the challenge, and that's our work, that's what we do. And yes, I just want to say thank you to April for inviting me.